Now that you know the basics of running and testing your console applications, let's start to talk about debugging. Debugging is the basic process of running the code, testing it, and looking for errors so that if your program is crashing or having unexpected events during runtime, you can figure out where the cause is and make a correction. There are a lot of basic ways that we can debug a program in Visual Studio, as it has a lot of different functionalities for debugging. But one of the most important ones we're going to talk about are the breakpoints. So breakpoints allow us to set a place in the code where we think a problem may be happening, and then walk through step by step each line of the code so we can evaluate behavior, variables, see what's happening in the code, the logic flow, and determine where the problem may be occurring. So we set a breakpoint over here in this gray section of Visual Studio, and so we can pick any line that we want to stop on and click in this gray area, and it will create this red breakpoint and highlight the line where Visual Studio will stop. So once you have a breakpoint set, you can start your application, and you want to make sure you're running with debugging, as breakpoints don't run in non-debug mode. And you'll see that Visual Studio stops on the line that you've highlighted with the breakpoint. And you can see the yellow arrow shows us which line we're currently evaluating. At this point, you can come down here to the Autos window and see variables that are currently evaluated in memory and the values that they hold. We can also see in the Locals window other variables that are declared and the variable's value. And if we have other items that we want to watch, we can put our mouse over them and see what the values currently are. So at this point, there are 3 different operations that you can perform. So up here on the toolbar, when you're in debug mode and you're stopped on a breakpoint, you have step into, step over, and step out. And so each one of these functions allows you to move through the code one line at a time so that you can evaluate your logic and the variables and try to determine where a problem may lie in your code. So for example, if I click step into, I automatically jump down to the next line. We can see our yellow pointer moved, and now we're on this line. I can see all 4 of my number variables have been set. And in fact, we can see that the number 4 variable, which has the value of 20, has now been highlighted in red because it was recently changed in the last operation. If I click step into again, I see my console window is open and I can see this statement was printed because that was the last function that we performed here, that write line statement. And if I click it again, I move on to the next statement. And as we open our console window, we can see those operations happening. So let's look at another example. In this example, I've added a method called doMath, which takes in an integer and multiplies that integer by 2, returning the result. Here, I've added a statement that calls the doMath and passes it in the value of number 1. So let's move our breakpoint down to this new section. And when we run our application, we can either step into, which will jump us down into the method, and we can walk through each line inside of that method, then seeing the result. Or, let me restart the program, we can step over. So if we know that the problem does not reside inside of the doMath method, we can step over that and not walk through the code that's happening down here and just get right to the next line in the main. So this has been just a quick overview of how to use some of the debug commands available in Visual Studio. You'll get familiar with more commands as we progress.